Hello everyone. I'm Eric, the workplace safety guy, and today I want to take you on a journey. A journey that for many people might seem to be about something technical and far removed from your everyday reality. But I promise you, once you understand what's at stake, you will never look at a manhole cover, an industrial tank, a silo, or a duct the same way again. Look at this image right here. A confined space. To most people, it's just a hole in the ground. To me, and I hope to you after watching this video, it represents one of the highest risk situations a worker can ever face. Because inside that space, danger doesn't announce itself. It has no color, no smell. Sometimes, no visible sign at all. I've always been fascinated by how things work, especially in the world of safety. And one of the areas that intrigued me the most was exactly this one: confined space work. How many times have we driven past construction sites, industrial plants, wastewater treatment facilities, and seen workers descending into enclosed spaces? But have you ever stopped to think about what protects them down there? Or what happens when that protection fails? I asked myself those questions. And the answer led me to a deep dive into American safety standards. And what I discovered, I had to share with you. Let's be honest, accidents in confined spaces happen. And the cruelest characteristic of this type of accident is the cascade effect. Someone goes in to rescue an unconscious coworker and dies too. Not out of carelessness. Out of lack of information. Out of not knowing that the air inside that space cannot sustain life. I had an experience that stayed with me. It didn't happen to me directly. It was an incident I followed closely during an audit. A worker entered a maintenance space inside a chemical plant.
No atmospheric monitoring. No attendant. No permit.
He lost consciousness in under 30 seconds. 2 co-workers tried to rescue him. All 3 were pulled out unconscious. 2 survived. 1 did not. That story stayed with me. And it made me understand exactly why OSHA wrote 29 CFR 1910. 146. Not for paperwork. Not for bureaucracy. It was written so that story never has to happen again. My first stop in this investigation was, of course, OSHA. For those unfamiliar, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, is the federal agency in the United States with a very clear mission: to ensure safe and healthy working conditions for all American workers. Think of it as the great guardian of occupational safety. When I started reading the documents and regulations, I realized that OSHA is not just a body that tells you what to do. It is the driving force behind a safer work environment. And when it comes to confined spaces, OSHA is surgical in its requirements. The primary regulation I found, and which became the cornerstone of my research, is 29 CFR 1910. 146. For those outside the field, that code might sound dry, but for me it was like unraveling a safety treasure map. This standard, which applies to general industry, is crystal clear. Employers must ensure that their employees follow a rigorous protocol when working in confined spaces. And here is the point that separates true professionals from the rest. The standard doesn't treat confined space as a generic concept. It classifies. It distinguishes. And that distinction can be the line between life and death. When I evaluate a space, I don't just think it might be confined. I classify it according to the standard. And that changes everything. OSHA defines it with surgical precision in Section 1910. 146. Be a confined space is one that is large enough for a worker to enter bodily, has limited means of entry or exit, and is not designed for continuous human occupancy. But pay close attention. Not every confined space is the same. The standard goes further and creates a category that demands your full attention: the PRCS, Permit Required Confined Space. What makes a space a PRCS? The standard is direct. You are dealing with a PRCS if any one of these conditions is present. A hazardous atmosphere, actual or potential. This includes oxygen deficiency, flammable gas concentrations above limits, or the presence of toxic substances. Material that presents an engulfment hazard, sand, grain, liquid, anything that could submerge the worker. An internal configuration that could trap or asphyxiate, converging walls, sloping floors, any design that could make escape difficult. Any other recognized serious safety hazard. The standard doesn't close the list, because the reality of industrial risk is too complex to be contained in fixed bullet points. If any one of those conditions is present, entry without a formal permit is illegal. This is not a matter of opinion. It is federal law. And here is something that truly impressed me when I studied this in depth. The classification process is not done once and filed away. The standard requires the employer to reassess whenever conditions in the space change, whenever internal processes change, or whenever the nature of the work being done changes. A space that was safe yesterday can be lethal today. Think of yourself as a safety officer at an industrial plant. You cannot simply walk in on a Monday morning and say, "Looks safe, you can go in." OSHA requires you to conduct a complete pre-entry assessment, as established in Section 1910, 146(c)(1). That means you must identify all hazards before entry, document every risk found, and implement effective controls before authorizing any access. There is no such thing as assessing during entry. The assessment comes first. Always. It is like a doctor diagnosing the illness before prescribing the medicine. After the assessment comes proper selection of controls. It is not a matter of anything will do. It is about choosing measures that truly eliminate or control the identified risks. And here is a point that stood out to me. The employer is responsible for ensuring all controls are in place before issuing the entry permit. This commitment to safety is serious. Now get ready, because this is where the technical heart of everything begins. The standard does not work with opinions. It defines objective, measurable, non-negotiable limits. And when I started to understand these numbers, I understood exactly why they exist. Oxygen, the line of life. The standard establishes clear thresholds. Below 19.5% oxygen deficiency. Immediate danger to life. A worker can lose consciousness in seconds without realizing it. Above 23.5% oxygen enrichment. Serious fire and explosion hazard. Materials that would not normally ignite become highly flammable. The safe window is narrow, between 19.5% and 23.5%. Flammables, the limit that cannot be crossed. The concentration of flammable gases must remain below 10% of the LEL, lower explosive limit. This provides a safety margin well before the point at which the atmosphere becomes explosive. Do not wait until you reach 50% LEL to act. The standard says 10% is the threshold. Above that, entry is prohibited. Toxic substances, within exposure limits. Toxic gases, such as carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, benzene, must remain below the PLs established by OSHA, the permissible exposure limits. Each substance has its own limit. And those limits were built upon decades of toxicological research. The mandatory testing sequence. Here is something very few people know. The order of testing is not arbitrary. The standard requires a specific sequence. First, oxygen. Second, flammables. Third, toxic substances. If you reverse that sequence, you can generate false readings on your sensors. In an oxygen-deficient atmosphere, catalytic flammable gas detectors can read lower than the actual concentration, creating a false sense of safety that kills. And furthermore, OSHA is explicit in Section 1910, 146(d)(5). Monitoring must be continuous whenever possible. A single initial reading is not enough. The atmosphere can change at any moment. A leaking valve, a nearby process releasing gas, an accumulation that did not exist 20 minutes ago. The detector stays active the entire time. While OSHA tells us what to do, it also defines exactly how to document each step. And here came one of the most important discoveries of my research. The Confined Space Entry Permit is not just any form. It is a safety contract. The standard section 1910, 146(f) is specific about what the permit must contain. Think of it like a doctor's prescription. Each item has a clear and deliberate purpose. Identification of the space, which space it is and where it is located. Purpose of entry, what work will be performed inside. Authorized date and duration. This is not an open-ended permit. Authorized entrance, named individually. Responsible entry supervisor. Identified hazards in the space. Control measures implemented. Atmospheric test results with actual measured values. Emergency and rescue procedures. Equipment required for safe entry. If any item is missing, the permit is invalid. And an invalid permit does not authorize entry. Period. I once found during an audit a permit with no atmospheric test results. Management argued the space was well known. The standard does not accept that argument. The space may be the same one they've worked in for 10 years, but the atmosphere inside is new every single day. 7. The roles. Legal responsibility with a name attached. One of the discoveries that impressed me most was how precisely OSHA separates functions in a confined space operation. This is not organizational preference. This is defined legal responsibility. Every person knows exactly what they can do, and what they cannot. The authorized entrant. This is the person who goes in. But not just anyone can enter. The authorized entrant knows the specific hazards of the space, knows how to use their PPE correctly, and this is the critical point, exits immediately if they notice any change in conditions. No discussion. No let's wait and see. Out. The attendant, the sentinel no one can replace. The attendant stays outside. Always. They maintain account of every worker inside the space, monitor conditions both inside and outside, maintain constant communication with those inside, and activate the emergency system when necessary. And here is the most critical rule in the entire system. The attendant cannot abandon their post. Cannot enter the space to help. Cannot get distracted by other tasks. Cannot be called away for another function while anyone is inside. Why? Because an attendant who enters to rescue without proper equipment becomes one more victim. And that is exactly what happened in the incident I mentioned at the beginning. 2 attendants tried to help. 2 more people were pulled out unconscious. The entry supervisor. The entry supervisor verifies that all conditions are safe before authorizing entry. They sign the permit, and assume legal responsibility for that signature. And they have the authority to cancel the entry at any moment if conditions change. This function cannot be delegated to someone without proper training. If there is one area where I have found the highest volume of failures during audits, it is rescue planning. Companies train for entry. But they forget that the emergency exit is just as important as the planned entry. OSHA, in Section 1910, 146K, is emphatic. The rescue plan must exist before entry. Not during. Not after. Before. The priority, non-entry rescue. The standard prioritizes non-entry retrieval whenever possible. This means equipping the worker with a retrieval system, lifeline, and full body harness from the moment they enter. If something goes wrong, they can be pulled out from outside, without anyone else having to enter the hazardous space. When entry rescue is unavoidable. If non-entry rescue is not possible, the rescue team must be specifically trained for confined space rescue. Have access to the location in a timely manner. Be capable of operating with self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA. Have trained in the actual space or in a similar space. And here is the detail most people overlook. The team must train in the actual space or in a similar one. Classroom training is not enough. Rescue needs to be practiced in the environment where it will actually be executed. While OSHA tells us what to do, NFPA 350, Guide for Safe Entry and Working in Confined Spaces, complements it with the practical engineering of how to do it. It does not replace OSHA. It deepens it. When I began studying the ventilation requirements, it was like a new language opening up. NFPA 350 requires that ventilation be sufficient to eliminate the atmospheric hazard, that airflow be directed correctly to sweep contaminants out, and that there be no recirculation of contaminated air back into the space. And here is something critically reinforced. Ventilation does not eliminate the need for monitoring. You can ventilate a space for hours. And still, an internal source of contamination can make the atmosphere dangerous within minutes. The detector stays active. Always. In one space I accompanied during an inspection, the company had installed mechanical supply ventilation. But the duct was positioned in a way that air came in and went out at the same point, without sweeping the bottom of the space where heavy gases accumulate. The ventilation existed on paper. In practice, the bottom of the space was contaminated. Only monitoring with a correctly positioned sensor revealed that. Before entering any confined space, there is a step that precedes everything else, the complete isolation of all hazardous energy sources. This is what 29 CFR 1910, 147, integrated into the Confined Space Protocol, calls LOTO, lockout/tagout. In practice, this means physical blocking of process valves, Complete electrical de-energization with personal locks. Pressure relief in pipes and vessels. Complete draining of lines carrying liquids or gases. Mechanical isolation with blank flanges, spectacle blinds, where necessary. OSHA requires that every hazardous energy source be eliminated before entry. If anything can activate, a pump, a solenoid valve, an agitator, the space is not safe. And no permit can authorize entry into an unsafe space. With all of these concepts in mind, I began to see confined space equipment not as simple tools, but as specialized systems, each one designed for a specific set of challenges. OSHA lists in Section 1910. 146(d)(4), the mandatory equipment for PRCS operations. Calibrated gas detector. Not just any detector. A calibrated detector, with a valid calibration certificate, with sensors specific to the gases present in the space. A detector without valid calibration is a useless instrument. It is worse than having nothing, because it creates false confidence. Ventilation equipment. Appropriate to the volume of the space and the type of contaminant. Supply ventilation, exhaust, or combined, depending on the geometry of the space and the identified hazards. Retrieval and rescue system. Tripod or anchor system, mechanical hoist, full body harness, and lifeline. Every worker who enters a PRCS must have this equipment connected to their body before entry. Not after noticing something is wrong. Before. Communication system. Continuous communication between those inside and the attendant outside. Radio, communication cable, visual signal, whatever is appropriate for the environment. Silence is never good news. And more important than having all this equipment, everything must be functional and verified before entry. Equipment with a defect discovered inside the space protects no one. Here comes another foundational OSHA standard, 29 CFR 1910. 134, respiratory protection. And it has one rule that every safety professional needs to have permanently embedded in their mind. If there is oxygen deficiency, below 19.5%, air purifying respirators are absolutely prohibited. This is not a recommendation. It is a regulatory prohibition. Why? Because air purifying respirators depend on the oxygen already present in the air to function. They filter contaminants, but they do not add oxygen. In an oxygen-deficient atmosphere, a filter saves no one. In atmospheres with oxygen deficiency or with contaminants at IDLH concentrations, immediately dangerous to life or health, only two types of equipment are permitted. SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, an autonomous respirator with a pressurized air cylinder. The worker carries their own air supply. Supplied air respirator, air provided by an external line under controlled pressure. The beauty of these standards is that they allow us to combine different protections to build the right system for almost any work environment. It is an intelligent and effective approach to safety. As I deepened my research, I came to understand that safety is not a one-way street. It is a shared responsibility, a collaboration between employer and employee. And training is the bridge that connects both sides. OSHA is explicit in Section 1910. 146. G training must happen before assigning any function, whenever conditions in the space or procedures change, and after any operational failure or accident. But what caught my attention most was not the when, it was the how. The standard requires that training ensure competence, not presence. Signing an attendance sheet is not enough. The worker must demonstrate that they understand the risks, can operate the equipment, and know the emergency procedures by heart. This is a legal requirement. On the employer's side, the employer must develop and implement a comprehensive confined space management program. This is not about buying the right equipment. It is about building a safety culture. Making sure the equipment is calibrated, that workers know how to use it, that emergency procedures are known and practiced. And in most cases, the employer bears the cost of this entire system. That is an investment in the lives of their people. On the worker's side. But the worker also has a fundamental role. It is no use for the employer to provide the best system in the world if the worker does not use it correctly. OSHA expects from the worker. Use all PP and equipment correctly. It is not an accessory, it is a protection tool. Inspect equipment before every entry. Report problems to the supervisor immediately. Exit the space without hesitation if any change in conditions is noticed. When that partnership works, the employer providing the tools and knowledge, and the worker using them responsibly, the workplace becomes exponentially safer. Throughout my career in audits and inspections, one thing became very clear: compliance with standards is not the only factor that matters. An equally crucial aspect, one that no standard can force on its own, is genuine commitment to safety. The most common violations I encountered, all of them direct OSHA infractions. Not issuing an entry permit, we've always done it this way and nothing ever happened. That is not an argument. That is luck. And luck runs out. Gas detector with expired calibration. The equipment exists, the certificate expired 6 months ago. The reading is as reliable as a broken thermometer. Attendant abandoning their post, went to get a tool, answered a call somewhere else. In the 4 minutes they were gone, a worker lost consciousness. No emergency plan. If something happens, we'll call 911. That is not a plan. OSHA requires a specific protocol, a trained team, and rescue equipment ready to deploy. Inadequately positioned ventilation. The fan exists, but the airflow doesn't reach where heavy gases accumulate at the bottom. Incomplete LOTO, blocked the electrical energy, but forgot to isolate the steam line entering the space. Training as a formality. The sign-in sheet was completed, the content was not absorbed, competence was never verified. Comfort and proper fit of equipment also belong here. Equipment that hurts, that pinches, that is uncomfortable is equipment that workers will avoid wearing. And unused equipment is a safety risk, not a solution. We have reached the end of this journey. And I hope that you, just like me, now have a new understanding of what it truly means to work safely in confined spaces. They are much more than hard places to get into. They are environments that demand a complete protection system, and that system has a name, a standard number, and a legal owner. Confined space protection is, in many ways, invisible protection. We don't think about it until something goes wrong. But the knowledge we have built today gives us the power to see that protection, to understand it, and to demand it. When I follow 29 CFR 1910, 146 to the letter, I am not being bureaucratic. I am applying a system built on real accidents, on real deaths, on families that lost fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, friends, inside spaces that could have been safe. The standard is not excess. It is the bare minimum required to survive. Whether you are a worker, a supervisor, a safety manager, or simply someone curious about this topic, I hope this content has shed some light. Check the safety requirements in your own workplace. Question procedures. Demand the permits. Confirm detector calibration. Ask about the rescue plan. Because in the end, safety is not a cost. It is an investment. An investment in lives, in well-being, and in a safer future for all of us. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If this content made sense to you, share it, because one person who learns about confined spaces can save their own life and a coworker's. Subscribe to the channel for more safety content that truly matters. See you in the next video.